here today with Ian, the co-founder of Now Money, one of the fintechs in the Middle East, which I think is fair to say has taken off and been really successful over a number of years now, operating in a really interesting part of the market. So I think first thing Ian wanted to kind of talk to you or ask you about is, I mean, obviously you've done multiple pitches to a whole number of VCs, got some very successful backers. I wanted to ask you, what is your elevator pitch? So if somebody was asking you for the 30-second elevator pitch, what is it?
Yeah, so in the Gulf countries, there are 25 million low-income workers. And most of these countries, they're ineligible for bank accounts due to not reaching minimum salary requirements. Yeah. So really what we do, in a nutshell, is provide them with accounts and the primary functions that they need, which is to be able to remit the money back to their family at home, and certain other ancillary products like mobile top-ups, lending, bill pay, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think it's very easy to look at the Middle East market, the GCC in particular, and say, 7 million people in the UAE. In reality, that's not, and that's kind of looked at as a bankable population, but in reality, it's not, right? There are so many, or such a big chunk of those individuals that don't have any access to banking at all.
100%, 100%, and that's the really interesting sort of dynamic here, especially in the UAE, which is one of the more exaggerated countries where the bankable population, in terms of the way the traditional banks see it, is actually literally the top 20, 30%, and the other 70% today have been left using only over-the-counter solutions, brick and mortar exchange houses, cash in hand, that sort of thing. So it's a really interesting dynamic, and that's exactly what we're here to solve.
Yeah, and I think quite often when I talk to clients about this particular segment and how it's completely untapped, the very first response you get is, yeah, but you can't make any money, and they're not interested in banking, they don't have smartphones. And I'll admit, probably 4 or 5 years ago, I had a very similar perception, and I think it's changed actually. So perhaps it wasn't entirely wrong there, but I think now it is completely wrong. What are some of the misconceptions that you've come across when you've spoken to people about this segment? Yeah,
it's a really good question, and actually something we're very proud of to be a part of changing those misconceptions. I think a lot of them are around, the one we hear the most is one that they don't have smartphones. And that one is often a misconception because you'll see low-income workers here with feature phones. Yeah. And often that's just the one they'll take out with them. But at home they'll have a smartphone. And the reason they all have a smartphone is because it's their one way of staying in contact with their families back home. Yeah. So they've all got WhatsApp, Viber, or whatever it is that allows them to stay in contact with their families back home. So they all have smartphones. The second one is that they're illiterate, which can be true, but more often than not, it's not in this day and age. And then the third one is that they can't use smartphones, or they're digitally illiterate. And that's a really interesting space because actually they can use smartphones generally, but their knowledge and experience has been relatively limited. So they can use those apps, and in the case of what we do, it's really trying to build something that allows them to use it as if it's made for them, because it is made for them. And it's as if it's their sort of native app, the first one they open. And that's really a big challenge that we've undertaken and really enjoyed trying to solve.
And I think language is a really big part of that, right? Yeah. And one of the amazing features of yours, which I've never seen before in another mobile app, is the number of languages you provide.
Yeah, currently 9 languages, And there's a number of different sides to it, and it's a really interesting sort of user interface, user experience challenge, where when we looked at it, we found that most of the apps in the market either come from the East or from the West. But actually, if you look at sort of where we are in the Middle East, and for workers from, say, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, to an extent the Philippines and Indonesia, there really isn't something that's been made for them. They're either using things that have come from the East or the West. So we have really focused on sort of starting completely from scratch in terms of building something made for this customer segment.
Yeah, but I suppose at the same time, we've spoken about this in the past as well, is that they don't know how to use a mobile bank, or they're not familiar with mobile banking. But in reality, the likes of Paytm and others in Bangladesh and in the Philippines and other markets means that they do have native mobile banking solutions that are in the millions and millions of customers, and they've been hugely successful. And I know you've spoken to me about how, but they've seen it before. And actually, those experiences are better than a local banking experience, right? So they do have experience of utilizing these types of products. And again, it means that's another kind of misconception, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And actually, often, as you say, they've had access to banking services in the country they came from, and they've not had them here. So they've actually gone a step backwards. So yeah, you're right.
And when I mean, in terms of uptake, obviously I enjoy watching the little videos you show of, you know, people that have had an opportunity to, because it's those real kind of life stories, I think, that really, you know, land. And when you understand that somebody that previously had to do that whole thing of withdrawing cash, going to an exchange house, remitting money, having to sit in queues and all that type of stuff, and then suddenly being able to do it from home. I think it's an amazing story, right? And kind of a story of empowerment that stretches across so many thousands of people. But I don't know, could you give us a couple of examples of maybe the kind of impact that you have seen off the back of your product? And do you get the opportunity to engage with the real customer and actually listen to what they think about it? And do you collect feedback from them? How do you engage with a customer? And share some examples.
Yeah, I mean, we try to be incredibly customer focused. So it's one area where we've managed to get a lot more engagement with our app than others who have tried this have. And part of that is that we do really major on the customer interaction in whatever medium that might be. So that's face-to-face when you first onboard the customer, but it includes over the phone, in-app chat, or whatever form of support they need. And we've actually found for us, our customers are more those customers that have had to reach out to us for support for whatever reason, even though sometimes those have been negative reasons, for whatever reason. They've actually ended up being more loyal customers than those who haven't. And the reason for that is that connection. This is not a customer segment where you can just put an app out there and expect them to understand it, download it, use it. You know, it's got to be a real... you've got to be really integrated with the customer and really work together with them to get them to the point where they're using your service in a completely comfortable manner. And
you talk about, I know from our experience working together on other projects where you're trying to expand your product into other kind of, or utilizing other partners to increase your reach, about the little nudges that you have to kind of give your customers to encourage them to utilize it. Because, you know, taking your cash to an exchange house and getting your receipt and stuff like that gives people comfort. But could you give us a couple of examples maybe of the types of things that you've done there to really try and drive adoption?
Yeah, and it's exactly as you say, often they're comfortable with certain touch points. And really for us, it's about identifying what those touch points are and trying to replicate those in a digital environment. So an example would be that they're comfortable going to an exchange house. Often they see the same person every month when they send the money. So an example of that would be, instead of just using a icon in the app of, you know, a question mark or something for a contact center, you actually use the person they're going to speak to's face. So they can feel that personal connection. It's that same thing they've had from the exchange house the whole time, and it makes a big difference.
And so Ian, both you and your co-founder as well, Kat, you're both from the UK.
Yep.
How have you found, like, engaging with a segment that has nothing to do with your background, and how have you? And I know one of your team members, I remember, it speaks about 6 or 7 languages, right? So you've got people in your team that help, but has that been difficult to try and engage with a customer that you can't converse with, or have you learned any of the language? How have you kind of responded to that? And how did you get, even especially I suppose in the early days, how did you learn from your customer when you couldn't speak to them?
Yeah, well, I mean, for us it was around really trying to make sure that we were solving the core of the problem, really understand what the core of the problem is, and then if you solve that, then you get yourself an engaged customer set who want to speak to you. Now, yes, you know, it's not, I can't claim to speak, you know, all of the different dialects in Indian and Sri Lankan languages and Pakistani and etc. But we've always found ways. We've always found people who do speak good in English, because there's a lot of them do speak incredible English. But more than that, members of our team, as you say, speak lots of languages, and we really trust them and work with them. But also another thing that we've really realized both in digital design and actually just in conversing with customers, is that a lot of communication is non-verbal.
Yeah.
So if you're showing a customer something,
iconography and stuff.
and you want their reaction, 90% of the reaction you can see visually. You don't need them to speak, and actually what they say is often a completely biased representation of what they really feel. So there's lots of different things, and we've had to learn to become very adept at understanding, as you say, a different customer segment, and there's lots of different ways we've done that.
Yeah. And maybe because we advise a lot of clients on exactly this. How do you get closer to the customer? How do you bring them into the design process? How do you become empathetic for their needs and the problems that you're trying to solve? How have you done that? Could you give maybe an example of how you do actually engage one-on-one with the customer? And I know you've got an onboarding process, which is quite unique, but yeah, could you tell us a little bit of how you've done that or solved for that?
Yeah, this is something that I find a really interesting question. Lots of people have asked this because we are very close to our customers, and the penetration rates we've got with this customer set with a digital product are an order of magnitude higher than anyone else has managed to get, which we're very proud of. The reason for that at its core is that our whole business is set up around having to solve this problem for our customers. If they do not use our product, if they take the cash out and go elsewhere, we make zero revenue. We lose money on that customer. So it's absolutely imperative for our entire business that we are customer focused. We understand that customer and we give them what they need. Because if we don't, we as a business don't exist. So I think rather than focus on all the smaller things that we do to be customer focused, I think the reason that we are successful is because of that. It's absolutely essential to us, and we can't fall back on anything else. So we can't get comfortable.
Okay, good. And I wanted a little. I first met Kat, your co-founder, probably about 4 years ago. And actually, at the time, I had a few of my designers. We came together. We ran a workshop along with Kat and a few of your team, just to help mock up some of the very first kind of screens and share some thoughts on how would you design a kind of a leading practice onboarding journey, and what would you show as your landing page.
Yep.
We spent a few hours together. That was a very long time ago. I know you guys have come a long way, and most recently you've had funding from Bill and Melinda Gates to actually redo the design of your mobile app. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've gone from basically looking for support from wherever you could find it to suddenly getting exposure to some of the largest kind of philanthropic organizations in the world? How has that been, and how has that made your life easier? Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, there's no silver bullet to these sort of things. It's a step-by-step process, and since we spoke to you those number of years ago, it's a lot of small steps that have just got us a bit more validation. They've managed to secure us a bit more funding. We've got a bit more visibility. We've got more reach, and all of those things get pushed forward a little bit to where we are today. And I think having a very clear vision and mission and purpose to the business is really helpful to that, because that absolute clarity in why you exist and who you're trying to help and that sort of thing, that's the sort of thing that encourages the huge names, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations, the massive venture capital investors that are trying to spot the next big opportunity and that sort of thing. And it's really that clarity of purpose that exposes you to those sort of people eventually.
And how was that exercise? You never told me about what it was like going through them and then supporting you, providing what. Actually, I don't know. You have told me a bit about it, but I thought you could maybe just tell us a little bit more about that process. And what's the new app going to look like? Because I haven't actually seen the full version of it. I've only seen the old version.
Yeah. So our mobile app is, in its existing version, is already, as you said, in 9 languages, and it's very much customized around our customer. But we are sort of obsessed with how to really make the perfect app for our customer set, which, as I said earlier, isn't really solved by apps that have design led from the East or the West. But then also, we don't have one demographic as our customers. We have customers from 100 countries, varying levels of literacy and all this sort of thing. So it was a really interesting design challenge, and we were solving it ourselves and doing an incredible amount of user research. And then around that time, one of our investors in the US, Axion, who are a financial inclusion focused venture capital firm, introduced us to a JV that was going on between the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and a design agency called IDEO, which its whole purpose was to inspire digital confidence in previously underbanked segments.
So IDEO's purpose is specifically to do that as well?
No, IDEO is a design agency,
was...
but the JV with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation had this purpose. So they started working on that with us, I think, end of last year, end of 2020. And it was a completely revolutionary experience for us because all the things we were doing ourselves and we'd sort of pieced together with support where we could, all of a sudden we had this huge force of nature in terms of like the funding and the professionalism of IDEO and all of that sort of stuff, take what that was and just bring it to the next level. And then we've managed to keep that momentum going. And then the new app, which is a product partially of that design process, it's a step on from where we were before in terms of being the perfect solution and designed around our customers.
Okay. And what's the response been from your customers? So, because this is always a big risk. You take an old application that was successful and people liked it, and you kind of reinvent or imagine it. There's always a risk around that, and I've worked with clients in the past to kind of manage it. But how did you manage that, and what have you seen the response to be?
Well, for us, it's all about we don't want to have any surprises. So the entire design process has been driven by and led by customer feedback. So there's not a single pixel, literally not a single pixel in the new app that hasn't been thoroughly tested and got feedback on from real customers. So to be honest with you, in terms of the response from customers, we kind of know that we already knew it was going to be good because there was nothing we'd left to chance. So yeah, I guess sort of hacked the system a bit in that way, making sure that nothing was left to chance.
But then what about the migration? Or has that happened yet, or is it still in process? Are you going to move people from the old app to the new app? Is that something that's happened? Or?
Yeah, that's in process at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that process, you are just gradually moving people across, introducing them? Are you going to force people? How are you managing that?
The app is changing, so it's not like we give the option to stay in the old one. But we are, as I said, we're sort of obsessed with customer feedback and obsessed with getting the design right for what the customer needs. And part of that involves a gradual transition from one to the other. We transition a certain segment of our customers onto the new version. We find out things about that. We get feedback, we improve it before we go on to the next segment, and then we go through the process again. So by the time you're getting onto the sort of 5th or 6th cohort of people, it really is starting to get very, very nailed down, and there's really, anything fundamental has already been solved. Okay.
I wanted to flip a little bit into, there's a quote I really like, basically, startups don't starve, they drown. It was a guy called Sean Carolyn, who's a founder in VC.
Yep.
And it's something I speak to clients about when they say, how do I partner with fintechs? How do I do it successfully? And I think that's really important to know that, because you see a lot of stuff in the market as well that for me is kind of beauty parading and marketing and no real substance behind it. One of the things I say to clients is that you have to have alignment in terms of your strategic objectives with the fintechs. So their purpose needs to be aligned with one of your strategic objectives. And you need to have somebody in the organization, a business person, that's going to really sponsor it and drive it through, be banging his or her hand on the table. How have you picked the right partners? How have you picked the right opportunities? How have you, said no at the right times? How have you decided to do that type of stuff?
Yeah.
Not an easy one to kind of navigate.
No. I think I spoke earlier about sort of having a core vision, a mission and purpose, and I think that actually really galvanizes everyone in the company to make sure they're focusing on things that drive towards that vision, that mission, that purpose. And I think it's really important, and we're a very values and purpose-driven company, and that's always sort of meant that we haven't really had to force it or think about it too much. We've always naturally pursued the opportunities or the partners that align with that vision, that goal of where we want to be. And that's made that whole process a lot easier and more natural.
I can remember speaking to Kat probably about a year or year and a half ago about a particular partnership opportunity, and I said, Kat, look, I've got a client, they're interested in talking to you, and she said, Mark, we're really busy. Is this really a client that I should be spending time with? And I said, yes, you should come and speak to them. And eventually you form quite a strong strategic partnership with that particular organisation. But I know it's not always been easy, right, to make those sorts of calls. And so, but have you had to say no? Have you regretted saying yes to certain things? Are there any examples out there that you could talk about that kind of illustrate how you've had to make really tough decisions as you've gone through the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, both. I mean, we've been going a long time, and we've probably made every mistake in the book along the way, and it really helps you to understand the right way to do things. I don't think anyone who claims they did it perfectly from day one is not telling the truth, I don't think. So we've got lots of examples where it wasn't the right thing for us to do, to partner with a certain firm. Thankfully, we've managed to sort of come out of those scenarios without too much ill effects. And in terms of examples of where we've had to say no, there's a lot of them. I mean, we've had to say no, frankly, to a lot of other fintech firms because we have a very clear and focused mission of what we need to achieve. We have a defined amount of resources to achieve them with, and unless that, whoever we're being offered to partner with is aligned with those, it's not a good use of our time, and it's a bit of a shame really, because we are huge supporters of other fintech companies in this ecosystem. It's an incredibly hard region to crack, incredibly hard. So we want to help, but unfortunately we've had to say no to a number just to be able to focus on what our vision and mission is.
And then where do you go in for counsel? Where do you? So I mean, I've got people that mentor me inside and outside of the organisation. We're a big organisation. There's 1,000 people I could go and speak to across the global network. What do you do when you're not quite sure or you need advice within your organisation? Who do you speak to?
I mean, I personally am inspired by a number of people within Now Money, because even though Catherine and I sit at the top, a lot of people within our organisation know an awful lot more than we do about specific things. So to be honest with you, it's quite rare that we can't find the answer internally. And I think you've got to, I like to think of myself as working for everyone within our company, not the other way around. I'm making sure they've got everything they need to achieve what they need to achieve. And they know a lot more about what they do than I do a lot of the time. And I think it's important to understand that. Outside of the organisation, I really sort of gravitate towards people who've been through quite a long and arduous challenge to get to where they need to be, because I think it's no secret that there's a lot more headwinds here to starting a fintech company and a startup than there are in other parts of the world, and it's been a huge challenge for us. And now I'm very pleased to say that we have sort of emerged from that, sort of relatively victorious, but it's incredible. It's been incredibly difficult, and I think I gravitate towards people who I know have faced those same challenges and been through those same experiences.
And is it in the same industry, Ian, or you go and speak to people that actually have just done amazing things outside? Or is it a bit of a mix?
A mix. Obviously, our networks gravitate towards the fintech industry, but I'm interested in anyone who's overcome obstacles to achieve great things in business, in any industry. And
do you find, having had success in this market, do you find it opens doors, gives you access to other successful fintechs around the world, and do you lean on them for advice, or because obviously you've gone it alone, you haven't, like you said, partnered with anybody else, but is that somewhere you go to for kind of counsel or
Yes, absolutely. I mean, a lot of fintech companies around the world have solved problems in incredibly innovative ways. And we love to hear about ways they've solved them. And a lot of fintech companies have scaled far beyond where we are. So there's so many things you can learn on how to deal with those growing pains, how to deal with, issues with any number of things. So, we're very lucky to have a good network of, say, friendly fintechs that we can speak to all around the world, partially due to some of the incredible investors we got. But that's incredibly useful.
And I wanted to ask you, you mentioned a couple of bits around, successful partnerships. And in this region, given kind of the regulatory landscape, finding a partner that is licensed onshore, particularly here in this market in the UAE, is absolutely critical for a fintech that wants to do something onshore. How did you? What advice would you give to people that are looking to enter the UAE market from a fintech perspective and don't know how to qualify the right kind of banking partner?
Yeah, I think a lot of companies that have failed in this space have tried to sort of not do the hard yards. I think here you've really got to do it properly, and you've really got to get stuck in. You've got to understand that it's going to take you years to crack it. You've got to, draw on every resource you can to help you achieve your goal. There's no silver bullet. There's no quick route. And I think any time when you're early on that someone sort of offers you a silver bullet or a quick route is very unlikely to happen. And then in terms of partners, we spoke a bit earlier about finding those that are sort of aligned with your vision and your values. And I think that's really the most important thing. I think trying to force big regulated financial institutions to do what you want them to do, if it's not aligned with what they want to do, is very, very difficult and is, can waste a lot of time for a fintech. Whereas when you're doing something which is completely aligned with something they want to achieve, that's incredibly powerful, and that's something we've really seen with Commercial Bank of Dubai since we partnered with them. So yeah.
And you talked earlier about your purpose, right, and the segment that you're servicing and supporting, and how and how important that is to your organisation. But it's not something that banks talk about. It's not something that any bank in this market, or any of the markets really, has said, actually, this is a big area of focus for us. So how difficult is that to manage? Because ultimately the banks are set up to make money for their shareholders, right? And I'm being very direct there, but and yeah, they will serve customers in the process of doing that. But have you ever felt that you've had to kind of actually just really focus in on the commercial side of what you could deliver for a bank, because that's what they're interested in? And has that made you think about your purpose? And I don't know, is that something that's you've ever had to think about? And
yeah, and we've had to spend a lot of time with banks to get them to understand our business model, because fundamentally our business model is different to theirs. A bank at its very core will take deposits from customers and lend money to others. The customers that we service neither have deposits left in a bank or borrow money from a bank. So that's why the banks haven't particularly wanted to work with them in the past. So we've really had to work with the bank in hand-holding them to understand what our business model is, and that it is different to theirs. We're not a mini bank. We are a different business model, but one that works very closely with them and actually can align with the way they operate. Provided both sides understand exactly how they work.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you as well, Ian, about your team, right? You're still a relatively small team, and I think one of the biggest challenges we see at clients is they are so big and they're so siloed that none of them collaborate, and none of them, or very few of them, actually even think that, hold on a second, what I'm trying to do is serve a customer and help a customer do, or solve a particular problem. How do you think, I suppose, and you'll gradually scale with time, but how, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the culture of the team, how you operate, how you run. Do you have daily stand-ups? How do you kind of operate as a team, and how do you then delegate stuff and work across the different markets that you're operating in as well? Yeah,
it's a really interesting question, and something that we really do is keep the entire team very close to the customer. So it doesn't matter whether you are someone in front of customers every day, or whether you're in a sort of back office function that doesn't see customers, you are with us always exposed to experiences that customers are having, what's going on with customers. And that's very important, because it keeps everyone aligned on focusing what they're doing towards making the experience better for the customer. And yeah, there's lots of things we do. I mean, we have weekly meetings where everyone's in them. We make sure that all departments, which in 2021 is rare, is that all departments sort of see each other face to face at least once a week. We try and have a day each week where all the company sees each other. And I think it's important that you keep that ethos as a company, and you keep everyone communicating with each other in a real way, and make sure that, as I said, everything you do is set up to be all around the customer.
Yeah. And when you were hiring that team, Ian, and when you were building it and developing it, what were some of the key things that you thought about as you expanded it? And has that been difficult? Because again, our clients are constantly talking about the war for talent. How have you navigated that, and have you picked the right people? Because I mean, frankly, you don't have the financial strength of of many of these large banks. So how have you incentivized and retained?
I mean, the war for talent is real, and something that we find is that we actually are in a much better place for that nowadays than people who can pay far more, because people who join us are really part of building something special, and they really feel there's a lot of ownership to what they're building. Which is incredibly motivating and empowering for a lot of people, especially of sort of younger generations. In terms of who we employ, we really focus on attitude. I think in a startup where you need lots of people to work together very collaboratively in a high pressure and very fast moving environment, attitude is the most important thing, more so than lots of experience, qualifications, that sort of thing that perhaps other firms would focus on more. And then, in terms of retention, we have good natural retention because everyone's pulling towards the same goal. And we all work very closely, which is makes it a fun place to work. And we try and be very human, and not too siloed in departments and that sort of thing, and make sure that, everyone feels like they're part of a family, really.
Okay. And I wanted to ask you as well, Ian, I know you like me have got young kids, you're a family man, and one of the things that when I've in the past thought about, would I go and do something myself and stand something up? And I'd always said to myself, but there's too much depending on me and all this kind of stuff. It's kind of a bit of an easy excuse, but you were a banker once and now you're doing fintech, but you're similar to me in terms of where your kids are and their age. How have you navigated that, and what convinced you to say, actually, you know what, I'm going to give this a shot?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very difficult one, because you are going into a world of extreme uncertainty from a world before that was pretty certain. So it is very difficult. I think, first of all, a phenomenally supportive family, especially wife, is very helpful. And again, I think, and I've spoken about this a number of times, but if you've got a very clear vision and mission, I think it makes it much easier, because there's a sort of financial element to it, which is obviously bad in the early stage and very risky in the medium stage. But there's another side to it when you have a very clear vision and mission, which makes it a worthwhile thing to do, even if the financial elements aren't as secure as they would be otherwise. But it is difficult. It is very difficult. I mean, when you have young kids and you have children, when there's an absolute emergency in a startup which doesn't have a huge amount of resources or departments to bail you out, it is really hard. And you've just got to find a lot of energy from somewhere, really. Yeah.
And then school fees will start to come as well.
And then Thanks for reminding me of that.
And I've never asked you this, Ian, but I need to ask you, why is it called Now Money?
Now Money, we needed something that spoke to the instant nature of what we do. Our customers receive their money instantly. They can send it instantly and easily. We test it with customers, half to see if it resonated with what they wanted and who we were, and half to check it wasn't a swear word in their language. But
it's obviously important.
Yeah.
Cool. And what's the kind of ultimate goal then, Ian, for you and Kat? Like, where do you see you guys in 5 years? And would there ever be a situation where you'd exit, or you'd allow a larger organisation to maybe buy you? Is that ever a consideration, or is this something that you're thinking you'll do 20 years from now?
Well, I'm not sure about 20 years, but I mean, where we see ourselves being is a pan-regional player. We see ourselves as really covering the needs of all of the migrant workers throughout the Gulf region, and then over the course of time, potentially starting to connect up some of the sending countries and receiving countries. Now, there's a market here of about 25 million people. We initially want to reach 1 million of those, and then over the course of time, much more. And we really see ourselves as being the absolute pinnacle service provider for these customers.
Excellent. So Ian, look, a pleasure to get to talk to you like this about this type of stuff. I think we don't very often get the opportunity to work with companies that are making a really big difference to people that are actually people that deserve the most help. So thank you for kind of having us be involved and work alongside you guys. It's an absolute pleasure, and we wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you. Thank you.